Okay, just another minute and then we'll get going again.
Can you go all that way?
Right, why not?
Good. All right.
It's amazing the way this smells like. You would think.
Is there any increment or anything in the order that I have to reset?
When you're
Other than for the
Okay, so hopefully everyone got a chance to get a coffee. And how many people got to have a look at the workflow states as well? I don't know. Okay, so some of you are going to stay behind after class. Okay, so before we go on, let's think of some intelligent questions we can ask. Yeah, I know, we're struggling, aren't we? Okay, who can remember what do we use workflow events for?
Well, it's system things.
System things. Top of the class then. Who can remember what actions are for? User stuff. And how do we control when we get to see the actions? Workflow states. And what else was it? I can't remember either, so we're all in this together. Okay, so the next section is, the first section was really just talking about some of the basics, or getting you familiar really with the editor and some of the basic concepts. We'll now start actually looking at stuff that's a little bit more practical in use. And this next section through till lunch is looking very much around login workflows. Now there's a few bits and pieces we'll go through on the way to login workflows themselves. Have a little bit of a look at some of the static data that's needed, some of the changes there. Brief introduction to workflow. You might think, well, we've just had that for the last 2 hours, Katie. But this is with respect to the login workflows. We'll have a look then at the login itself, and then we'll finish off looking at some of the changes to syntaxes. So it's all kind of on a theme, and we will keep. To be honest, actually, we have got a little bit of flexibility in the agenda for tomorrow, so maybe we'll just see how we go. I want to make sure you get enough time to sort of get some of these concepts in your head, so we'll maybe take a little bit longer over this section if we need to. So we'll start with looking at static data setup. So the first thing that you need to know is when we're logging in using login workflows and we're referencing a template, we're referencing a new kind of template called an entity template. So the entity templates are for use with workflows and with this multi-sample login portal UI. They can be found under setup, login. We move the projector and I'm not entirely convinced it's focused. Is it focused? From here I'm finding it harder to read, but maybe my eyes have just gone straight me. So login, you've got it all printed out, so the entity templates and under here, or within the login cabinet. One of the things to bear in mind is, based on popular demand for sample templates, we've made entity templates versions, so you can version your entity templates. The entity template is used to define the fields that you're going to reference define as you're logging in your jobs or your samples or your sub-samples. entity templates can be used to define, so it's one generic template and you pick the entity type, so you can have them for some job samples. You can also have them for tests, and if you associate an entity template with an analysis, when you're creating that test, we can use the template to define which columns we see within the test editor. So that was something that was always quite often customised before, which columns you saw in the test editor. So now you can use a test entity template to define that. So that's something that's a kind of a nice new feature for those people who are familiar with Sample Manager. The entity template is used for the field. So when you get into the properties tab of it, it's very similar to what you're familiar with on the fields tab. It's so long since I've set up a sample template. You've got control. Is it just fields, the next one? You're all looking at me blankly. When you set up a sample template, what's the name of what's the on the button? It is fields. Okay, so if you're familiar with that, this is very similar. You have a place where you pick the property from the table. You have a place where you pick what you're going to see within the template, so the prompt of what you're going to see when you're logging it in. And you can assign a default value which can preset the value. To note, on here we can now use the same tag thing. Again, we come on to it later, but you can now internationalise this by using a tag referencing. This prompt type drop-down, again, if you think about that fields page when you're sample login templates, there was all those little checky boxy things. And when you boil it down, it comes to 4 options. So we just gave you the 4 options. So you can now have that it's prompt and optional, it's prompt and mandatory, it's display only, or it's on the template, you can assign a default value, but it's hidden at runtime. Okay, so it's exactly the same functionality, but we've just simplified how you pick which they are. The default type, this is again exactly the same as you had previously in sample templates. You can either have the value, or you can choose to do a sign before edit or a sign after edit. They are mostly there for people who are trying to maybe move their sample templates that they've currently got defined over to be entity templates. More generally, if you're maybe creating a new one, you might just want to use the workflow to do some of this stuff. We'll talk a little bit more about some of the implications of before edit and after edit later on. But it's exactly the same functionality as you currently have in the sample template. Filter by allows us to quite have a simple restriction on the browse. So for example, I'm here on my sample point 1, and I'm going to say that when I'm browsing for my sample type, for my sampling point, I only want sample points that are linked to a particular location. Okay, so it's just a simple way of doing simple associations to restrict the browse based on the other fields that are there. I think this screenshot's old. I think it's cleverer than that now and only gives you the ones that are valid as opposed to everything. I think this is a screenshot from about a year ago. So I think when you do this, if you set this exact example up, I think you will only see location ID in the drop down. If you want to do something a bit cleverer than that, you can also apply, or rather alternatively, you can apply a criteria. So again, it's for restricting the browse. Okay. So, take note, if any of you come back to me after this class to ask me a question, it will almost certainly be this question. I'm warning you ahead of time. If you do, I'm going to publicly humiliate you in front of all this group, because I'm going to sort of hammer it home so hard now, the number of times I get asked this by the same people. So, when you add a new field, say to your samples, and you want it to appear on the template, the place that you do that is from the global table defaults, which you find under the system folders, and there's a tab called template fields. this is where, so it's almost like the entity level, actually, you're defining, in this case, how my samples appear. There's lots of other things here, but this is where I pick which fields are available for my entity templates. Master template field still works exactly the same as it always did for job templates and sample templates, but for entity templates, it's here. It's the template fields tab on the table defaults, global table defaults. I promise you somebody will come back and ask me.
Does the new one work for samples and jobs?
Does it?
Does the new one work for samples and job templates too? Or is it just,
Yeah, and text.
okay.
For entity templates or for template templates? You still have to use master templates.
You still need to use master template fields exactly as you always did for sample templates and job templates.
Right.
For entity templates, it's here.
That's what I meant, okay.
Yeah. I'll ask you, I'll keep coming back to this.
So there's two places you have to take your, is that stored in the new table or is it
Depending
stored
on what you're
under
gonna use.
Explorer
again.
table?
New
Yeah.
table.
Well,
Oh, sorry, the table defaults,
If you wanna
it's
keep
in the Explorer table, yeah,
As table detail.
as table details, yeah.
Don't worry, I'll get you to do this in a minute. There's an exercise in the second.
So you could table load that as a dependent table with dependent features.
No, because I don't think there's actually a physical link in the database we can pick it up. But yeah.
Okay. Just of note, while we were reading, so Sample Manager 10, surely it's certainly all the Sample Manager people will know, Sample Manager 10 had a lot of replacing or redistributing the VGL LTEs as property sheets. We didn't do the entire system as part of Sample Manager 10, and it's a continual evolution to continue to move them over because it made sense with all of the other login things that we were doing. Sample Manager 11 test schedules has moved over to be a property sheet. It works exactly the same as the other one, except there's one update that was much frequently requested by many people, both in this room and customers, and that is that you can have now the same analysis listed twice. So it's not just being able to do a second replicate, you can list the same analysis twice, which allows you to have different component lists or instruments or whatever. Okay, so other than that, it's exactly the same. It's just stopped that restriction. Okay, and at this point, I think I'm going to get you to do something. The thing is, I say go and do stuff, and then it takes a long time, and we never get back again. I would love to get you to do 2 exercises in one.
Ooh,
Is that asking too much?
took too long to get coffee, that's why.
No, let's do it. So, what I want you to do is I want you to create, so at the moment, no, actually, no, we're not going to do it yet, because otherwise, honestly, well prepared this, honest. No, well, because it's a bit bitty if we do it this way. I'll go through the next section, and then we'll start to build it up. Okay. And I'll, or shall we do it now? I don't know, should we do an exercise or not? I don't know. Keep. Yeah. Thanks, George. So, the next thing is then looking at some stuff specific to the login workflow that we haven't looked at yet. So the login workflows are for, at the moment we're just going to look at jobs and samples. We will come on to sub-samples later on after lunch. So at the moment we're just going to do sort of traditional samples, sample management, samples and jobs. They have their own workflow type. We've already gone through where you can get to them. One of the things then that we need to think about is what we have here as the parameters for our say create sample node. So if you think about sample templates, we had that control pane which allowed us to set up lots of stuff. For entity templates, it's just the list of fields, because that control stuff is kind of workflowing. So entity templates is purely the list of fields, and those other things that you would traditionally expect to set up on your sample template are parameters of the sample, create sample node. So let's go through them. The top one is the template, that links to an entity template. Quick question, if I want to add a custom field to my entity template, where do I go and define it?
Don't know, Katie.
It's not master template field. Where is it? Come on, somebody.
Global table.
Thank you.
Table defaults.
I will ask, honestly, I will continue to ask, and I've got money on someone asking me afterwards. Life cycle. Ignore this for now, because we've got a whole section on life cycles tomorrow, but at the moment just leave this as the default life cycle. But this is where we can pick for different samples that we're logging in to follow different life cycles. So then the rest of it is things that we're very much against that control page. So what's our starting status? Defining the initial status of the sample, unavailable, on hold, available, whatever it might be. ID text is where we define how we're going to generate the sample ID text. It might be through referencing a syntax, or we might just define it here as a formula, and I'll go into that when we get onto the syntaxes section in this, but that's where you define how we're going to name our samples. The allow parameter, so allow remove, allow split, allow to create new tests, means that we can control whether it's a predefined method. I've got within the workflow, I'm going to add these tests, and I've got these subsamples there, and that's exactly how I want that workflow to run. If I say to allow, it means that the operator can optionally go and add more. So some people are, some customers are very specific, like this is my method. I don't want the operator to be able to go and change it. It's the same thing when we get to the job. Do I want them to be able to add in extra samples, yes or no? Or is it a very, very fixed predefined method that has to follow the workflow? And the count at the bottom is the number of that we're going to register as we're going through. So the number of samples that we're going to register.
So I have a question regarding to the ID text. Can we use the same syntax that we have for the standard sample loading
Yes.
in the workflow?
Yes. Yeah, we'll get on to it. I'd say we've got a whole sort of bit on syntaxes, so we'll go into it in a little bit more detail there, but yes. So for the job login workflows, very similar. Again, I've got a template linked to an entity template. Quick question. If I've added a new custom field to my job header table, how do I get it on my template? My entity template. We define life cycle. Again, it's the life cycle the job's going to follow. Job name, again, is how we define the job name, and again, we can either reference an existing syntax or create a new one, or just reference it here as a formula. And again, allow remove, allow new samples, means that we've got that option to really lock down the workflow. It must run exactly as prescribed within the workflow, or we can allow people to be able to change it on the fly. And again, there's a count. Yeah, so there is a node that we haven't talked about many nodes, but there is a node that we haven't talked about yet, which is a call workflow node. So I could either, here I've got my job login workflow, and within that I'm creating my job. I've got an action to add some samples, and then I've defined what's happening with my samples here. That's obviously not reusable, it's defined within that workflow. So alternatively, I can have my job workflow exactly the same to here. So at this point, I can call a separate workflow which has that defined. And both things will do exactly the same thing, but this I can reuse. Okay, so it's a concept that's familiar to Nautilus users. You don't tend to build it all up in one workflow. You tend to have different workflows that allows you to have a bit more flexibility. So both things will have the same end result, but the call workflow allows me to just call, in this case, a sample workflow. In this case, this is probably a bit much at this point. At this case, it will always run non-interactively. So when I'm logging in at this point, when I'm using my action, this will all happen kind of behind the scenes based on what's predefined. When I use a call workflow node, I can choose whether I want to run it interactively or not. And what I mean by that is whether it's going to pop up the login screen or not, whether it's just going to go and do what's defined in the workflow and only do that, or whether it's going to relaunch the login window and allow me to meddle and do whatever I want at the point. So again, it's similar to like those allow parameters. it means I can control either it's going to run exactly as the workflow prescribes, or am I going to allow the user to be able